everyone. Welcome to the 418th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have so much to talk about this week. We're going to be talking about what the heck is happening over at Google with external hardware partners and Google Displays and its strategy around the smart home. We're also going to be reviewing a Matter device that, frankly, makes me feel like Matter wasn't worth the wait. We're also going to be talking about what the heck is happening over at SmartThings. And if you think the entire smart home ecosystem is on fire, well, you may be right, because that's kind of how I'm feeling after all of this. But we're going to bring more smarts to more places, including your knee replacements and hip replacements and physical, what would we call those? I don't know. Things that live in your body. So we'll talk about that and what that means. We're also going to talk a little bit about generative AI, because how could we not? This is Siemens and Microsoft bringing generative AI to the industrial IoT. And the government is seeking some input on AI regulations. So we'll talk about what they're looking for. And finally, we'll be talking about Raspberry Pis. Sony has made an investment in the Pi Foundation. And our guest this week is actually Eben Upton, who is the head of the Raspberry Pi Trading Company and the co-founder of the Raspberry Pi Foundation. So he's going to be talking about what that money means. Are the supply shortages for Pis actually over? When will we see the next new Pi? And what does the Raspberry Pi Foundation think of RISC-V? All of this and more await you. We're also going to hear from our sponsor, OnLogic, and take a voicemail from one of our listeners. But before we get to that, let's hear from another one of our sponsors. This week's sponsor is Silicon Labs. Silicon Labs is a leader in secure, intelligent wireless technology, and they've launched their 2023 Tech Talk schedule. This year's Tech Talks include dedicated technology series for Matter, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and LPWANs. They'll help you build the development skills needed to deliver cutting-edge IoT products. You can join Silicon Labs experts and industry leaders for these one-hour virtual trainings created for developers by developers. So tune in, ask questions, and accelerate your device development today. Register now at scilabs.com. Okay, Kevin.
This is going to be a good news, bad news podcast.
Yes. And we're starting off with bad news, actually.
Right.
Good news?
No, bad news, especially for you and for me in particular.
Yeah, because I have one of these. Okay. So we're just going to call this segment of the show, What's Up with Google? So far, we know that Google has said they're going to end updates that basically kill their third-party hardware displays. Kevin and I both happen to have one. Kevin, I think we both have the Lenovo, right?
We both have the Lenovo, which was one of the very first ones. It's worked really, really well for me. We love it. I use it as a picture frame for Google Photos to show pictures of the dog, and it's awesome.
Yeah, that one sits in our kitchen. It's our primary one.
Yeah, same here. However, no more software updates because Google's not going to provide them to third-party display makers. So Lenovo, JBL, LG, whoever else makes them, they're just not going to get any new features. And yeah.
Yeah, and today is my birthday when we're recording the show. So happy birthday, me! And I just got my birthday present was actually the Sonos Era 300 speakers. And I believe y'all remember that I was talking about I want my Google display to be able to tell my Sonos to play something and have it play. I know I can't talk directly to Google on the Sonos because Sonos was we thought it was the lawsuit, but Sonos says it's because Google changed the way third-party manufacturers work with Google Assistant. And we were like, that's kind of weird. So this probably also means that we'll never see that on my Sonos either.
Yeah, it's interesting. It begs the question of, so like you said, what the heck is going on with Google? Because you look at somebody like Samsung, who is a competitor, has a good platform, but has gotten out of the hardware business and is doing everything solely through software and services. It has some hardware partners that make its hardware now, but it's not Samsung hardware. And we're going to talk more about Samsung hardware in a little bit and the downside of this and the downside of this approach. Google seems to be going the Apple route and getting everything under its roof to do hardware, software, and services in the smart home. And if it continues further down this path, that will lock out third-party devices to a large degree. Well, obviously our devices are no longer as valuable to us because they're not going to get software updates. And they even say currently video calls and meetings, if you use Google Duo calls on your smart display, won't work as well.
Which I do.
Yeah, well.
I know. I use the Lenovo Smart Display 10. That was, let's see, I'm trying to remember.
I think we got those in like 2018 or so.
Yeah, they were a long time ago. My first one, because I have the Lenovo Smart Display 8, so the original, one of the early ones, I got that in like 2018. Anyway, I have that and I use it in my kitchen to talk to my mom when I'm cooking sometimes. And I forced my mom to download Duo, and that was a hard sell, but she did it.
And I also wonder what's not addressed here. I'll get back to the bigger picture in a second. What's not addressed here are things like I have the Lenovo Smart Clock with a dock and a wireless charging station. And it runs like a very limited bare bones version of the Google Display software. So I can't take calls on it or anything like that, but it's a little like a mini 5-inch display with Google Home.
And that's running Android things?
That I don't know, because Google had a lot of their displays running on Android things. Then they moved to Fuchsia in the past year or so. And a lot of our devices seamlessly were upgraded to the Fuchsia OS, but we don't see any difference. I don't know what it runs, but it comes from Lenovo, which is a third party, and they don't mention this particular type of device or class of device.
They don't in any of their information. The other thing to note here is I have the Google Nest Hub display second generation, the one with Thread and the one with Soli inside. And that actually works really well, but it's small. It's a 7-inch screen, whereas my Lenovo was like this 10-inch screen, which is great for what it does.
Plus, the Lenovo works in portrait or landscape mode based on its base and however you want to use it, which is great for video calls.
Yeah. I am really disappointed in this. Now, the macro message running through all of these digital assistants that I think is worth pointing out is this year is kind of a year of reckoning for Amazon and Madame A and Google and HeyG, in the sense that they're like, we put a lot of money behind this, building devices, building out the services, building out the AI, and it's not making us money.
Right.
And it's hard to advertise to people on these things. Amazon gives it a good go and then everyone opts out because they get really irritated. And people were already distrusting it from a privacy perspective. I think Amazon's actually like the sidewalk network by using some of these devices as a way to create decentralized wireless coverage as a way to maybe salvage some of this, although they don't charge for access to the low power wide area sidewalk network that they're offering developers. It's just a way to get people into the cloud. So who knows? I mean, maybe we're getting to this point where we're like, oh, we can only do so much by grabbing everybody's data and pulling it in. We really have to create a compelling business model on that. And we haven't been able to yet.
Right. And I don't know what like other companies are doing in terms of are they making money or losing money. I suspect on the Apple side, they probably are making money through the device sales because they are typically much higher priced. Apple has notoriously high profit margins on all their hardware. They're not selling the data. So short of getting people into the iOS ecosystem and buying more iOS hardware, such as iPhones and Apple TVs and such, that's probably how they're making money. And that suggests to me that I don't know if Google's smart home is really going to be around in 5 years because they are furiously cutting things that don't make money.
It doesn't make, I mean, I don't know if the smart home as we're experiencing it today, it feels like we took a left turn, hit a wall, and we're going to have to back ourselves out of it.
Yep.
And figure out a way to pay for things that make sense for us. And this is something I've been thinking about, and eventually I'll write something coherent. But for now, I'm feeling a lot of doubt, and it kind of makes me sad because, Kevin, we've spent so much time talking about how exciting this could be.
And so much money on these things. If you think about how much money we've spent compared to most people, yes, we get review units and we return those, but we still buy our own stuff. If I get a review unit and I like it, I go out and buy the product. You know,
I do think we'll be able to continue to turn on our lights with our voice. Like there are some features that I think that we're going to have forever. So,
and the reason we can is because we're not tied to a smart display or smart speaker. It's all built into the phones as well. And we mostly all have those phones, regardless of platform. So yes, that's fair. But maybe these accessory devices don't really exist in a future that you're envisioning.
I think we'll still have some accessory voice devices because I think now the displays are a little iffier, but I definitely think we'll have, actually, I think we'll have at least one decent sized display, maybe two, one for each story of the house. They're nice as picture frames. They're nice as, I don't know, clocks.
Yeah, I mean, they are mostly fancy remote controls for me. I mean, I do view other things such as the weather, or maybe I'll play some music, but honestly, it's mostly a photo frame these days for me.
90% of it's a photo frame for me. A smidgen of it is sometimes my kid watches YouTube on it in the morning, but not as much anymore because we're older. Anyway, okay, so what the heck is Google doing? I don't know, but I will tell you, I did and it was the happiest moment because for like the last month and a half, they've been acting up. I got rid of my Nest Audios. If someone wants them, just in the next week or so, drop an email to info@StacyOnIoT. And if I get a bunch of things saying, I want those, I'll just draw a name and I'll give you two, let's see, they're blue Nest Audios. I hate them. I hate them so much.
I think Stacy likes her birthday gift with the Sonos.
They fell off the network all the time. And then in the last few days, because of, I think it's Google's lack of investment here, the microphone settings, basically it would fight with my Lenovo to answer the request. And then it wouldn't get the request. And then it'd be like, I don't know how to help you. So it feels like they're irrevocably broken and irritating. But if someone wants them, I will mail them to you. Because I'm that nice.
Here, take my broken product.
This is in the spirit of full thing.
And some of this may have to do with your network, your number of devices, and which devices. It could be that the Lenovo, which doesn't get software updates anymore, doesn't have the smarts to determine which speaker is actually listening, or which microphone, rather. So they may be perfectly fine for somebody, just not for you.
And if no one asks for them, you've got a week. You've got until the next podcast. So info@stacyoniot.com. If a bunch of people want it, I'm just going to put all your information in a hat and draw somebody in. You can maybe
after that enthusiastic description of your product, I think we should have an over-under bet on how many people ask for it.
True. I want to be fair. You need to know, I'm not making.
Yeah, no. All good. How about some good news?
Yeah, let's talk about good news. Hey, Google Home's getting new features. So we've been excited. I've been excited about this because this is all part of Google Home getting a little revamp. Partially tied to Matter is they were letting you do more stuff with automations. And now they're making some tweaks that allow you to control connected devices like curtains, shutters, garage doors, mowers, heaters, and humidifiers. They used to be under the devices tabs and you could see them, but you couldn't adjust them. So now you can open your blinds halfway. Woo! Probably not your garage door. That feels like either open or closed.
No, I wouldn't do that. But yeah, blinds, you have, different settings you can put for how much you want them to open. You can turn things on and off. You couldn't really do much with these before.
Yeah. So I don't use diffusers in my home, but if you do, a lot of people do. This will let you don't have to go all in.
I suspect not too many people yet have smart appliances. I know you do, but I think over time everything's going to have smarts in it. So this is kind of nice. I have none that would work through these new upcoming features. So
yeah, I don't think I do either. My GE oven, I don't think is on there, or I didn't see it on there. And I still have yet to compel myself to connect my LG stuff.
Yeah.
My washer. I'm like, LG washer, I don't need you. All right. But
back to bad news.
Matter. I'm not really thrilled about what's happening with the devices we've tested. So far we've made kind of not excuses, but it was hard to update the original Eve plugs that were getting a firmware update to Matter. So that was kind of a pain in the butt and didn't leave a great taste in anyone's mouth. But we're like, well, that's okay because it was a firmware update and those are weird. So we're getting some of the first off-the-shelf Matter things. And we've tried Meross has a smart plug. I added that to my network just fine. And there's also a TP-Link Tapo smart plug. I think you tested that, Kevin. Did that?
I did. Yeah.
How'd that behave?
It worked perfectly fine. It was actually great, available to both of my smart home ecosystems here, Apple HomeKit and Google Home. No problems.
But you just tried out the brand new Nanoleaf Essentials light bulb and light strip.
Correct.
Those are all Matter. They come with Matter from the get-go. And what'd you think?
So these were announced, I believe, last month. I think it was last month, and people could pre-order them. They're shipping this week. If you pre-ordered, I just found out from the folks at Nanoleaf. So yay. But, overall, they're good. They are essentially the same products that Nanoleaf Essentials were before, just with the addition of Matter support. And that's done through a Thread radio in these. So these have a Thread radio and a Bluetooth radio. So they won't work with Amazon's ecosystem yet because Amazon has only rolled out Matter over Wi-Fi. And that's fine. That's not on Nanoleaf. That's an Amazon thing, and I get that. But I do have Thread radios in my Apple and Google hubs. So I'm like, let me try it. And right off the bat, I needed the Nanoleaf app to do it for pairing. And I'm like, why? I didn't need it for other Matter devices. I can just go into Apple Home and say, hey, Matter, boom, here it is. Or Google, Matter, boom. Well, I think I know why. Because as I got these paired, and the pairing process is super quick. I will give them credit for that. Like literally 2 seconds. You scan the QR code, and it's like, got your device, adding it to your Thread network. Done. It's great. Problem is, currently, if you have Apple HomeKit, you obviously need an iPhone to do this. You use the Nanoleaf app, and then you toggle a switch and say sync with HomeKit, and it will add your Nanoleaf device to HomeKit as well. That's fine. If you are on Android, you can pair it through Google Home, and it syncs up in the Nanoleaf app on Android and Google Home, and shows up in the Google Home app on iOS, which is also nice. However, for the life of me, no matter what phone I use, I cannot get both ecosystems supported. And I went back and looked at the Nanoleaf press release, and they never mention multi-platform support. I also have a question in via email to those folks, sent it to them this morning. So when I hear back, I've asked them, can I have both, like most other Matter devices, or not? And why do I need your app? I'm waiting to hear back. But that's kind of disappointing from the Matter experience. It's not what I expected at all.
It's 2 times disappointing. First time, because Matter said you should be able to work with multiple ecosystems, right? So if you have these devices, and technically you can. You can't work with multiple. One at a time, which is not what people think when they think that. And 2, because you still need the app to get this online and to get this connected. And Matter told us we would not have to download 80 million apps. Now, I get it. Nanoleaf is one of the few apps that I would want to download on my own anyway, because Matter's not going to let you do the cool lighting recipes. But to force it in this fashion feels high-handed and frustrating.
Well, it's also in the description of its Matter support. It's like you need a home hub, and they list the Apple HomeKit hubs. They list the Google Home hubs that are supported. They mention Samsung. They tell you that Amazon doesn't yet work yet, and they tell you why. So you're kind of like, oh, I have these hubs, right? If you're somebody like me that has multiple hubs. But they never say, oh, yeah, you can use both at the same time, too. I felt deceived in a sense. And I don't mean to be too harsh, but that's just, maybe it's my understanding, right? Like I've got an expectation of Matter that it'll work across multiple platforms. And if people have one platform, these are great.
Yeah, you will have to use the Nanoleaf app to get it on there.
Yep.
Which not ideal.
And you'll want it anyway, like you said, because you have more scenes, you have the music syncing with the Nanoleaf playlists. Yeah, I mean, if you're familiar with the Essentials, the same version of these without Matter, they're the same product, just different radios. So they're good products. I mean, I like the light strip on my desk right now. I like the bulb. I'm not a fan of the shape, but I got over it because I don't really see the bulb. I see the light from the bulb.
I think the shape is fun. But yeah, and these are good bulbs, like he said, and they're reasonably priced. And eventually, like right now, you can't use Amazon because Amazon isn't supporting Matter products that use Thread just yet. But at CES, they said that support will come this spring, which we're in the middle of spring. So hopefully we'll see that soon. But yeah, this is disappointing. And last year, I had many people who were like, Stacey, Let's level set on Matter. And Nanoleaf was one of the companies. Like they were like, look, this is going to be a slower rollout. This is not going to work magically. This is hard. But we're 4 months in and I'm not loving it.
And this could change. The experience could change, obviously, with software updates. In fact, like right now, if you're on iOS and for whatever reason you have a Google Home, and there are a lot of people that have that, you can't use the Google Home app on iOS to add this device. You have to do it on Android. However, they said it's coming to iOS later this month. That's some progress. And maybe the next step is, yes, multi-controller support. But I'm not seeing it now unless I missed something.
Yeah. So we'll let you know if anything changes. And in the meantime, we have, this is not good news, bad news, good news. This is good news, bad news, bad news. In the bad news section, if you are on SmartThings still, and I still have a SmartThings hub that I've been testing stuff on for purposes, you may have experienced some real high drama and you may be real pissed. And I am not one of the SmartThings users that had this happen to them, but back in April 5th, Samsung did an update and they ended up deleting a bunch of people's hubs and devices. Now, they say it is a small number of SmartThings accounts, but a lot of people were complaining. I know my device went offline and had some issues, but I was also out of town, so I didn't really pay any attention to it, which is a shame because this really upset a bunch of folks. But what happened is, for unlucky users, some of them, their SmartThings hubs or the AOTech SmartThings hub, so any of their SmartThings physical devices, were bricked. So a couple of them don't have working devices anymore. A lot of people had their devices just deleted, so they're going to have to re-add everything.
Every single device.
I know a bunch of SmartThings users, and those people love this platform because it's customizable. And some of them have been on it for like 7 to 8 years, and that's a lot of gear. So if it's a Zigbee or Z-Wave device, you're going to have to re-add all those. And when you re-add Zigbee and Z-Wave devices, Z-Wave devices, you have to actually unpair them from the old thing first. It's a process.
This will take hours if you have 30 odd or more devices. And honestly, I get why people like Samsung SmartThings. Me personally, I don't want it in my house because of things like this. Samsung has been wishy-washy with their long-term vision. They've changed focus totally 180 degrees recently. And it just doesn't seem as stable because there's just so many moving parts with Samsung. It's just, if you use it and you're happy, great. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I do not.
Yeah. So here's the deal. Honestly, if all of your stuff was deleted, abandon the platform. And I'm going to tell you why. You don't need it. There are so many better open source options that do things much more locally, that have if you're an old school SmartThings user and are familiar with Groovy, switch over to Home Assistant. They've got the sort of device drivers you could build your own if you really want to, if you get into the ecosystem. So Home Assistant's a great option for you. If that feels a little too hard, Hubitat is another great option. A lot of our listeners are on Hubitat. They've got a brand new hub, the C8, and it is, how much is the C8?
I believe it's $150.
Yeah, it's got the Zigbee Z-Wave radios in there. Those are two really good platforms.
And you can go to town with customizations on both of those platforms as well. So you're not losing on that end. I mean, maybe it's not going to be in Groovy, but either way.
None of your stuff's in Groovy anymore. I mean, unless you've been running it yourself. So
because they made another change a couple of years ago. Yes. See, it's always moving. It's always changing. And that's what I don't like about it.
Yeah. So that's what I'm going to recommend to all of you guys. If you stick on SmartThings, they are supporting Matter. And I'm just going to stop talking. All right, moving right along. I'm putting this story in here because I think it's an indicator of future legislative changes. So the Wall Street Journal has a fun article about a smart knee replacement. And this is a knee replacement that was introduced by Zimmer Biomet Holdings back in 2021, and it came with built-in sensors. And the sensors just transmit data about your knee replacement, how it's working, to your orthopedic surgeon. And it says things like, oh, I can rotate this much. I'm doing this. And the doctor's supposed to track that and be like, oh, you're doing so well, or, oh, we need to schedule more physical therapy. And so the whole column is basically like, hey, we're going to stick tracking sensors inside medical devices that go in your body, and we're going to get that data, which is really awesome. Except, for example, this particular knee replacement, it tracks range of motion. It also gives you step counts and your stride length and your distance traveled and your average walking speed. It's not giving like GPS location, so yay. But you can't lie to your physical therapist or your doctor anymore about how much exercise you're doing because it's literally implanted in your body. It's not like a fitness tracker you can take off and give to your neighbor's kid and be like, go walk around the block for me. So that's a little disconcerting. For example, if your health insurance pays for this knee replacement, are they going to be like, hey, you didn't walk. I'm not going to pay for something if you're not going to try to make it work for you, right? So I say this and it feels like a worst case scenario, but I don't know that it really is. And I think that's why digital privacy is going to become more important. So I'm looking at this as a leading edge kind of indicator of why we're going to need digital privacy legislation sooner rather than later, because I think this is one of the areas where there are actual harms that will be easily disclosable to people, right? Like in the American legal system, you have to show harm to really get laws passed or to get settlements, that sort of thing. And it's hard to say like, oh, I feel like my privacy, like my vocal utterances were listened to by some contractor. I mean, does that really harm you? I mean, it makes you feel uncomfortable. Like maybe I don't want this thing in my home, but it's hard to demonstrate harm. If your insurance company doesn't pay for your knee replacement because you don't walk to their specifications, then that's actually a documented harm, right? So this is where I think we're going with digital privacy. This is just Stacey's soapbox on digital privacy now. And things like this, aging in place, I also think that aging in place is going to be one of those things where the smart home industry really pivots to. We're seeing it. Security and aging in place are one of the few things that people are paying for. We talked about that last week. And I think privacy is going to be a real big, important part of that. So I think that's why we're seeing the CSA get involved in both the wellness effort that they announced a couple of weeks ago and a digital privacy effort.
And I would agree with everything you said. I would also add, I mean, we focused so much for years on digital privacy in the smart home. And yes, that can be very invasive, but what is more invasive is your personal health, items you wear or items in your body. And I almost feel like we put the cart before the horse and almost should have put privacy practices around that first. But the market didn't go with wearables and all these fancy features about all these sensors. They went with the smart home first, and that's why we went that path.
Yeah. And I mean, should we have done digital privacy there too? Yes. Anyway, moving right along. All right. So that was the digital privacy interlude. Was that good news? Bad news? It could be either.
News.
It was news. All right. So also news. We're entering our generative AI era. We talked about this in the newsletter. I talked about like places where generative AI, things like DALL-E or ChatGPT could be used in IoT. There's been a lot of talk about smart assistants. There's also a lot of potential use cases in the industrial IoT with basically digitizing and creating an assistant around understanding automation processes and how software works in a plant ecosystem, for example. And Siemens and Microsoft have basically gotten together and said Siemens is going to have a new Team Center app for Microsoft Teams that is going to help with people who are trying to operate factories understand what might be going wrong. So you can just ask it, why is it making that noise? Or I'm getting this alert. What are the possible use cases? And it will be able to search through all of the information that it has and give you something very easily, which is kind of compelling. They also are doing Azure OpenAI service-powered assistant that will help with debugging code in software for factory automation. And I have a cool story to tell you. So when I was at the TinyML Summit, I saw a gentleman named Jeffrey Moore, and he's actually going to come on the show. But he is a senior controls engineer at a company called Shiloh Industries. And they actually did this cool, he'll talk about it in a couple of weeks on the show, but they did a project to bring TinyML to welding robots. And as part of that, they had to write code for the programmable logic controllers that they were running on the floor. And He said that they used ChatGPT to write the code to talk to the PLC, and they were able to salvage about 40% of the offered code, and it saved them about 4 hours worth of work. So it obviously, they didn't just say, write this and run it. They actually reviewed it and made sure it worked. But the fact that they were able to use like 40% of the code, it gave them a good starting point for their interns, and it saved them about 4 hours of work. Hot diggity, that's awesome.
Heck yeah.
We're talking about this as a press release from Siemens and Microsoft, and I'm sure in the press release, it's magic. It'll be glorified. Fabulous. But I do think there's a lot of potential here, as long as you have a process in place to understand that this is not going to deliver a finished product. So I just thought this was cool news. So there you go. It's happening. They're bringing it. It's another example of generative AI and the IoT. Yay. All right. Other goodish news. The Biden administration has asked the Department of Commerce, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, to comment. They're asking people for comments on regulations and rules around generative AI. What do we know about this? The Biden administration has actually been very proactive around AI. They put out an AI Bill of Rights, I think it was last year. That's really good. It was a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights to build a framework for how we should legislate and regulate AI. And it had really good points in it, like, hey, we need to have audits in place for understanding how these work. We need to have ways for people to complain about these working if they don't work for them. You need to have a person in the loop somewhere to complain to. Things that actually aren't happening today. So the RFC, which is a request for comment, is what it's called. The NTIA is basically saying, all right, what policies should we be developing around audits, assessments, and certifications so we can have people trust AI systems? So I love that they're starting from an audit and trust creation process as opposed to being like, how can we deploy this? So they want to know what kinds of trust and safety testing should AI development companies and their clients conduct? What kinds of data access is necessary for conducting these? So like, do we need all of the training data, or should we just have a working model, and test it against a set assessment? Do we need a set assessment? How do we develop that that's not biased? I don't know. And then how can regulators and other actors incentivize and support credible assurance of AI systems? Do we need to build an Energy Star for AI or some sort of sticker? How does that work? And then different industries are going to require different approaches. So what should those look like? What industries need what types of approaches?
I'm actually on the regulations.gov site now. I want to add some comments.
There you go. So comments will be due in 60 days. I'm going to send you a link to where you can go to find all this if you would like to make a comment other than something like, go AI or AI sucks.
AI rules.
Yeah. If you have something smart to say, then say it. And I just wanted to do a big shout out to the NTIA. I love it. They're the agency that brought us S-bombs. And they also manage rural broadband funding. I mean, the NTIA is just is it my favorite agency? It's probably still the FCC, but I do love it. So I don't know if I have any fans in the NTIA out there, but I like y'all a lot. Okay. Other news. This is good news. Kevin, this is good news, and it's secret news because you don't have it. The Connectivity Standards Alliance is basically announcing they have released Zigbee Pro 2023. Woo! And we're not going to talk a lot about this because it's just more Zigbee. But Zigbee Pro 2023 is going to give you more security. And it is also going to extend the supported bands beyond 2.4 gigahertz, taking it out of that super crowded Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, everything band. And it's also going to enable something called Zigbee Direct, which will simplify device onboarding and control BLE stuff. Oh, that's interesting. I have a lot of questions about that. So this is brand new. This was just announced today, and there's a lot of information here. I'm going to try to unpack this probably a little bit in the newsletter this week. So
interestingly, Zigbee Direct is going to use Bluetooth LE. That's a change for them.
Is it?
They say the revision enables Zigbee Direct, simplifying device onboarding and control utilizing Bluetooth Low Energy.
Okay, so instead of Zigbee, you're going to use BLE?
Well, for onboarding.
Oh, that is big.
Yeah. Yeah, Z-Wave you have to exclude and all that, but even so, it's just an interesting approach.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll dig into this for the newsletter because it's certainly It's certainly a big deal, possibly. And if that is true, then we just kind of subsume Zigbee into BLE. Over time, Zigbee goes away and Thread and BLE become the primary connections?
That's a good question.
Yeah, we'll ask that. I'll let you know in a couple days. Okay, and our final little bit of news that we're only going to talk very briefly about, because then we're going to talk to you, and then we're going to hear from our sponsor, and then we're going to go to our guest, who is going to talk about the news. Sony has made an investment in the Raspberry Pi Trading Company, which is the organization that sells Raspberry Pi devices. And it's an undisclosed amount. And I have Eben Upton, who is coming on next to talk about why they took this investment. Will it help with supply chain issues on the Raspberry Pi front, and much more?
Oh, I hope so.
Fingers crossed. I'll give you a hint because I can't make you wait that long. The money isn't really going to help, but Eben does say that this next quarter, like, they're on track to ship everything they're supposed to ship.
Yay.
I mean, again, I can't say that that's true until this quarter's done and they actually do it, but apparently the drama might be over, y'all. Okay, you could get a Raspberry Pi 4 maybe in May, maybe in June, and then it won't be hard anymore. Okay, so we'll hear from that in a minute, but first it's time for us to listen to y'all. It's time for the Internet of Things podcast hotline, the segment of the show where we talk to you and you ask us questions. You can call us on the hotline at 512-623-7424, and you will be entered to win a 3-pack of Matter-enabled Nanoleaf Essentials light bulbs. So when you win, I'll give you a shout and I'll be like, hey, do you want the A19s or do you want the BR30s? But these are colorful light bulbs. They're fun. You'll like them. And there you go. Okay. So that is what you are entered to win if you call us at 512-623-7424 and ask us your question. Now, this week's question is from Jared. Let's hear it.
Hi, Stacey, Kevin. This is Jared Shear from Winter Garden, Florida. Love the show. I learn new things about IoT every week. I just bought a Tesla and have Endphase solar panels. Are there any smart devices that will charge the car when my solar system is producing more electricity than is needed for the rest of the house? Thanks again. I love the show.
Okay, Jared, I'm throwing this over to Kevin because he actually had you used to have solar panels from this company.
I did. I had Endphase solar panels at my previous house. I had 41 of them. I loved them. I now do not have solar panels in my new house, but I do have a Tesla, so I'm kind of in between. Here's the problem. This is not going to be good. You're not going to like this, Jared.
This is a bad news segment.
in a sense, you could do it, but it's going to cost you, in my opinion, far more than it's worth. So Endphase kind of made their name by they make inverters for solar panels, and then they buy panels or rebrand them and they install them and you have them. So you know what I'm talking about. For other people, when you have solar panels, the power coming from the sun is converted to DC power. You then have all those solar panels wired up to an inverter, which changes it to AC power, goes into your home electrical system, and you use it as you normally would. The difference here with Endphase is each solar panel has its own inverter. So at the source of the panel, it's changed from DC to AC. And then that is all fed into your home electrical system. So the problem for you, Jared, is Endphase doesn't have like a central inverter down by your electrical panel to like shoot off and have just a circuit for your EV. They don't have that I know of. And I've talked to somebody who installs solar panels, including Endphase, just last week. They don't have a solution for you that would work. They are working on centralized inverters, but the reason they do the microinverters is because if you have a central inverter and some of your panels are shaded, you actually get less power out of the whole system. With microinverters, only the affected panels are affected by any shade, so you get more power. That's why Endphase does it. So if Endphase comes out with an inverter solution, you could change over, but it's going to cost you thousands, if not $10,000 to switch. What you could do instead is buy a smart EV charger that is smart enough to read your power inputs and outputs, knowing when you're generating solar energy or excess solar energy, and use the power then. The problem there is, again, you're going to spend a lot of money. Like two that I found, the MyEnergy Zappy V2 and the Smappy EV Wall. I don't know why those kind of rhyme, the Smappy and the Zappy. They range anywhere from $1,200 to $2,900 for an EV, a smart EV charger. And you already have at least the Tesla charger that came with your car. So do you want to spend thousands of dollars just to charge your car, quote unquote, for free during the day? I think that's a tough sell. I hate to say it. If you're locked in on Endphase now, I don't see the point of pursuing this.
There is hope. The hope, though, is like a few years in the making, in the sense that every company who's building electrical equipment and things to interact with the grid, both inside and outside the home, they're trying to create smarter, responsive systems that will talk to each other. Right now, there's not a standard. So we're seeing a lot of systems get built, like Schneider showed one off at CES that was all their gear. They will have APIs that will be open, but there's no guarantee that Endphase is going to want to talk to their API. So I think we're going to have like a whole smart home situation around the electrical grid, because we're apparently not smart enough to recognize the importance of standards when it comes time to make money, but sure.
Yeah, and speaking of hope, I should note that out of the number of chargers that I researched, the Tesla wall connector, which is their $600 to $800 EV charger, they haven't yet added solar-only charging, but it's in the works, or at least they're planning for it. When that will happen, I don't know. Will it even happen? I don't know. And will it require Tesla's solar panels and inverters? I don't know. That's the problem. You're ahead of the curve here in a sense, so it's way too expensive to like massively change your system now.
Yeah. Enjoy your time on the bleeding edge. We certainly have. Sorry, Jared, that this is not great news. Okay. That concludes this segment of the show. If you'd like to give us a call, we can be reached at 512-623-7424. And sometimes we do give good news. All right. Please stay tuned for a message from our sponsor. Please stay tuned for our guest, Eben Upton, who is the head of the Raspberry Pi Trading Company and co-founder of the Raspberry Pi Foundation, who's going to be talking about the investment from Sony, smart sensors, the Pi in industrial settings, and when we might see the next Pi. And we're even going to talk about RISC-V. So much stuff. All of this and more awaits you. But first, a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is OnLogic. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. And this week's sponsor is OnLogic. And I have Hunter Golden from OnLogic here to talk to us about hardware reliability at the edge. So Hunter, can you give our listeners just a quick introduction?
OnLogic designs and manufactures a wide range of small form factor industrial computers engineered to thrive where your average PC or even other industrial computer might fail.
All right, so can you talk to me a little bit more about that line, where other computers might fail?
Absolutely. At OnLogic, when we think about reliability, we really think about exceeding expectations in terms of product life. For many of our customers, these are mission-critical pieces of hardware that are capturing data and, in some cases, running complex machine vision programs in harsh environments. Hardware failure in these instances is unacceptable. The reliability of IoT solutions really goes beyond just the computer, and ultimately, reliable products require the relationship between various components to work harmoniously.
Can you speak to what makes your products different and how the environment plays a role here?
So first off, in many of our systems, we use Intel's purpose-built embedded processors. Intel's hardware makes it easier to gather useful, accurate data and transform it into awareness for autonomous systems and intelligence you can reuse to raise efficiency, increase productivity, and improve safety. What sets our computers apart from traditional ones is that our PCs incorporate a fanless and ventless cooling design, which uses the entire external surface of the PC to dissipate thermal energy from the processor and other heat sources. We are able to do this while preventing operational limitations to compute speed while reducing accumulation of dust and debris inside, all at some pretty extreme temperature ranges. So not only does this dissipate heat effectively, but a fan represents a single point of failure for the entire system. For example, if a customer is relying on hardware to monitor crowds in an environment with a lot of dust or airborne debris, a failed cooling fan could bring the entire system down.
What are some other examples of challenges that your customers face?
From the environmental perspective, a crucial element that you can't even see lies in the electromagnetic disturbances with electrical equipment. Electromagnetic disturbances are also a constant source of pain with our customers in specific markets where highly energetic processes disrupt surrounding equipment. More simply put, power transients, magnetic fields, RF, and static discharges can wreak havoc on computers. Some examples of traditional challenging computing environments include computers placed near cell towers where they can be heavily impacted by RF disturbance, near radio equipment and rail tunnels, computers that operate near robotic welders, and in the area of certain types of medical equipment like MRI machines, and that's far from a full list. In each instance, the computers have to endure disturbances daily caused by electromagnetic interference. While the effects could range from a quick blip, data loss, or complete system malfunction, highly shielded computers like ours at OnLogic can eliminate those failure points. We are constantly blown away by the imagination and ingenuity that our customers show in the way they use our computers. And we're always so pleased to hear that all the conversations, careful design decisions, and detailed testing we build into OnLogic computers help us to make their ideas possible.
This sounds great. So where can our listeners go to find out more about OnLogic?
I encourage you to visit onlogic.com/IoT to learn more.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is a return visitor. It's Eben Upton, who is the co-founder of the Raspberry Pi Foundation and the head of the Raspberry Pi Limited, which is the trading company that sells your Raspberry Pis. Hello, Eben. How are you today?
Wonderful. Absolutely fantastic to be here.
Oh, man, I'm so excited. We've had you in the past. We love what you're doing, and I just want to say thank you for coming back. And we're here to talk about an investment that Sony has made in the Raspberry Pi trading company.
Yes. So this is our big news for the week. Probably one of our 2 or 3 oldest, deepest strategic partners, Sony Corporation, have made an investment in Raspberry Pi.
Now, you're not telling us how much they've invested, and I would love to hear what you're doing with this investment. But first, is this going to help us with, finding Pis? Because they're still pretty hard to get.
Yeah, that's right. It's been a painful couple of years now. We, along with a lot of other people, are about 2 years into what we consider to be a constraint environment for semiconductors, an environment where the upstream supply of semiconductors is limiting the rate at which we can build our products. Now, the good news, I suppose, is that we are, having had a fairly muted first quarter of this year, we have just entered a quarter which we believe is going to be our biggest ever quarter for Raspberry Pi sales. We expect to sell between 2 and 2.5 million Raspberry Pis, so an annualized rate of between 8 and 10 million Raspberry Pis a year between now and the 30th of June. And then from next quarter onwards, supply is, I guess, effectively unlimited, certainly unlimited by semiconductor supply. There may be other things that limit our ability to make Raspberry Pis, but we, from next quarter onwards, we don't anticipate any issues. So it's been a hard couple of years. It's been a couple of years, I guess, of having to make difficult decisions about how we allocate the limited incoming semiconductor capacity to products, and then how we allocate those products to customers. But the good news is that we are really now in the very last few days of that shortage environment.
Excellent. Okay. The Sony investment may not help the supply chain issues, but they seem to be possibly over. Yay. What will the Sony investment do?
Really, the Sony investment is about, I guess, cementing one of our oldest strategic relationships, right? We actually had our very, very first contact with Sony on the 29th of February 2012. So the day we launched Raspberry Pi, the day we started accepting orders for Raspberry Pi, we were building our first Raspberry Pi computers in Shenzhen, and we had an email from somebody working for Sony in South Wales saying, well, we actually think we can build Raspberry Pis at your target price and give us a go. We were in production. It was really a crash program. We were in production by August of that year, by August of 2012. I think the initial expectation was that we would build tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 units at Sony in South Wales. And then over the years, we progressively reshored our manufacturing to the point that for the last 2, 3, 4 years, we've been almost exclusively manufacturing with Sony in South Wales. We have a couple of accessory products that are still manufactured in the Far East. So this is kind of one of our longest strategic relationships. We have, obviously, the backbone of it is contract manufacturers still. We have a strong relationship with the image sensor team at Sony. So we've been shipping Sony image sensor-based camera products since 2016, and actually have launched over the last 3 months. I think we've launched about 6 separate camera SKUs are built around various pieces of Sony image sensor silicon. So we have this big contract manufacturing relationship. We have an also quite large, smaller but still quite large image sensor relationship. So this is a very long-standing relationship. The investment really is about recognizing that. It's about cementing this sort of relationship between our two organizations. And it's done in the context of, I guess, Sony's increasing interest and our increasing interest in AI, ML, image processing operation. On the education side, we think very hard about making sure that what we're teaching people with Raspberry Pi is relevant and modern. And so, we're interested in bringing these kind of AI, ML capabilities to our industrial customers and to our enthusiast customers. Sony have products and services in this area, and this relationship is really, that's the direction where this relationship is going. And I guess it's probably the proximate reason for doing this financial transaction with Sony.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Sony has introduced these amazing image sensors that can pull in a lot of data. You can do a lot on chip. We just talked to Sony at the Tiny ML Summit that I was at about their Atrios platform, which is a platform they're working on to bring machine learning applications to their image sensors. I don't think of Raspberry Pis as part of this equation. So can you talk about how companies or your education arm, whoever is trying to pull in image data onto a Pi, and kind of talk about how that works together?
Cameras are probably the largest single if you look outside core boards, if you look outside, just selling Raspberry Pis, cameras are our most successful accessory. Now, what are people doing with those? Well, historically, there is an element of, there's a strong element of using them for photography applications, right? So using them to take pictures of the world, not to understand the world through pictures. And then in the industrial space, people use them for industrial process monitoring, right? Simply for recording things that have happened in an industrial process for later, so you can go back and see what happened later on. So those are not analysis, that's capture. That's not processing. That's not analysis. That's capture. Now, I guess what continues to change over time, as Raspberry Pis have got more powerful and as various accelerator products have become available that you can connect to a Raspberry Pi, you see people attempting to do real-time analysis of what the camera is seeing. And so rather than the output from a camera system being a stream of images, it can be a stream of images and some metadata about what the Raspberry Pi believes is going on in those images, or indeed it could just be the metadata itself. And so that's kind of been an ongoing trend, and it's happened, I guess, in the context either of people doing those inference operations, so you're running ML models, and you may be doing inference on the Pi itself. As the Pi has got faster, you can do more inference operations on the processor. Or it might happen in what we might call kind of a three-box world, where you have the Raspberry Pi, you have a dumb camera, and you have some sort of piece of external accelerator hardware. And so it's become increasingly popular in our industrial and OEM customer base. I guess what we're doing here is we're saying, and there's always a question: when are you going to put AI acceleration on the Raspberry Pi itself? When are you going to bake some AI? When are you going to allocate some silicon area to that? And the answer is probably never. For kind of an important economic reason about Raspberry Pi, which is that we don't like to tax users. What we like to put in the core platform are the features we think everybody will use. So fast CPUs are always a win. We can always justify putting a faster CPU in a new Raspberry Pi, right? We always justify putting more memory into a Raspberry Pi. We were able to justify putting wireless networking, wireless networking, Bluetooth into Raspberry Pi, either because they don't cost very much, or because we're confident that a very large fraction of our customer base will use them. Now, the problem with putting machine learning acceleration into a core Raspberry Pi product is it is, in practice, always going to be of extreme interest to 10% of people, maybe 20% of people, and of no interest to the balance. And therefore, you can't really justify putting $1 worth of silicon into the platform if it's going to be of interest to 10 or 20% of your users. The natural place for a acceleration, as distinct from running models on CPUs, the natural place for acceleration is in an accessory product. And that's what gives you this three-box world, the world where you have a Raspberry Pi, an accelerator, and a dumb camera. Now, the really exciting thing about this new round of Sony devices is it gets you a two-box world. It gets you a world with a smart camera and a Raspberry Pi, but it's a different partition, right? You put the acceleration at the point of capture rather than putting the acceleration on the core product.
It is exciting, and I can see a use case where you end up with a Pi running maybe not a multitude of sensors, but a couple sensors, and having them do their own processing and then send that data to the Pi for additional local processing. That's a really compelling design. Okay, so let's talk about use cases for this, because obviously I covered the launch of the Pi all the way back in the day, and it was so exciting. Having cheap computers for education and bringing the price and complexity of this down was so important. That for a long time was your mission. And now we've seen we've seen the Pi Foundation and the Pi Trading Company move into industrial use cases. I think y'all kind of were pulled into that. But I'd love to hear where y'all are going on kind of the industrial IoT side.
It's interesting. We did, when we started this, we thought we were making an educational toy. And we had a series of surprises. And probably, of course, the first and most famous surprise, I suppose, was that there was enormous hobbyist interest in the platform, that there were adult, technically literate hobbyists who were waiting for a device like the Pi. So that was a surprise, and that was really the surprise that drove certainly our day one. This 100,000 units that we sold on the first day, this 1 million units in the first year. That was what drove that surprise. I guess the second and maybe less well understood surprise was how quickly industrial and commercial users started to adopt the Raspberry Pi as a platform, really often as a way to avoid building hardware platforms, as a standardized, low-cost, high-performance, high-reliability hardware platform for people to run software on, people who felt that software was their differentiator. There are a lot of people who were having to go and build hardware in order to have a venue to run software. Once you provide them with that venue as a commodity product, they can get out of the business of making hardware and focus on software. And that's the thing that's driven the next stage, I guess the next upside surprise in terms of 3 weeks ago, we shipped our 50 millionth Raspberry Pi. Even though the last couple of years we've been in a constraint environment, we've still got to 50 million Raspberry Pis. And the backbone of that growth out to 50 million has been this kind of groundswell of industrial use. In terms of where we're going to take it next, the interesting thing is how little we've had to make specific investments targeted at industrial use cases of the platform. When we designed a Raspberry Pi single-board computer, we are emphatically not sitting down and saying, this feature's going in for an industrial user, this feature's going in for an educational user. All the features are for all the people. Now, we do, of course, have derivatives of the platform which are intended for specific market segments. So we have the compute module line of deep embedded Raspberry Pis. These are designed to be embedded into form factor sensitive OEM products. And then on the other extreme, we have Raspberry Pi 400, which is a Raspberry Pi and a keyboard. It's an ARM-based Linux PC built into a keyboard, that kind of form factor that's very familiar to me as a child of the 80s, where every computer looks like a keyboard. And that has no real industrial applications. But the core product, which still accounts for the majority of our sales, the single board computer, the credit card sized object, we've been able to please everybody with a single product. So what you see from us, probably not specific. You'll see a sort of continuation of that kind of focus on making most of our investments at the SBC level, and then trying to derive a limited number of products to serve the different markets, and derive specifically modular products to serve the deep embedded community. You may see some accessory products which are targeted at particular market segments. But really, talk about products, Atrios ecosystem products that we may build. They're likely to be inference accelerated camera products, which are great for watching Raspberry Pis go past on a conveyor belt. They're actually used. IMX500, which is an Atrios family sensor product, is actually used today at Sony's factory in South Wales when they make Raspberry Pis. And they've trained it to know what a good Raspberry Pi looks like and what a bad Raspberry Pi looks like, and it can pick the bad ones off a conveyor belt. So you'll see products like that, which are going to be fascinating, going to obviously be useful in an industrial context, but you can bet that they're going to end up on a lot of hobbyists' desks. They're going to spend a lot of time looking out of people's bedroom windows trying to spot a fox.
Oh, yeah. No, we have someone who set up a Pi with an image sensor just to see if the light is on his dishwasher.
I saw a wonderful example of somebody using kind of machine learning to digitize analog dials. So, if you have some legacy product that displays its output as a set of analog dials, then one thing you can do is you can point a Raspberry Pi and a camera at it, and you can run some machine learning model, and you can learn to read the dials, and then report the state of the dials as data over a network. And so these things, they crop up, they crop up everywhere, and they crop up in all of our markets. It's fascinating. And of course, a lot of that speaks to the fact that, how do we end up in industrial sockets? We end up in industrial sockets because enthusiasts have got used to Raspberry Pi, and many of those enthusiasts are professional engineers, and then they take Raspberry Pi with them into their workplace.
Yeah, you give someone a generic platform that can solve a lot of problems, they will put it to work. So right now in the industrial space, most people are using Pi 4s?
It's a bit of a mix. One way you can track the evolution of our business and the increasing dominance of the industrial customer base is to look at the product mix and look at the number of people who are still buying Raspberry Pi 2s, Raspberry Pi 3s, Raspberry Pi 3 Pluses. And of course, industrial customers, their affection is much, for a particular iteration of our platform, is much stickier than a consumer. The day I launch Raspberry Pi 8, consumer demand for Raspberry Pi 7 will drop off a cliff. But industrial demand for Raspberry Pi 7 will continue for years and years and years and years and years. I think last year we sold 70,000 Raspberry Pi 1 Pluses. So that's a product that was launched in July 2014 and superseded by Raspberry Pi 2 in February 2015. So not only is it a nearly decade-old product, but it's a product that had barely 6 months as a flagship product before it was superseded, and yet you still have 70,000 sales of that product into industrial.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I believe you said this back in December, but you are not putting out a Pi 5 this year, so the 4 is what the 4 Plus is what we've got if we're feeling fancy.
So the 4 is the flagship product. It is, of course, it was launched in June 2019. It's very nearly 4 years old. But of course, those have been a very strange 4 years. I do think probably if you'd asked me in June 2019, would you have a Raspberry Pi 5 out by now? I probably would have guessed yes. We have managed to post a performance uplift. It launched as a 1.5 gig product and is now a 1.8 gig product, which is broadly equivalent to what we did from Raspberry Pi 3 to 3 Plus. So it's a thing that we might have branded as a Plus line product.
So y'all have been doing the traditional Pi architecture for years. And in 2021, y'all launched a brand new chip. You designed your own chip. It's part of the Pi Pico line. And I'm really curious because there's a lot of architectures are a little wavy right now. We could have lots of different options available to us. So I wanted to get a sense of what you're thinking about potential for new chip designs from y'all, or RISC-V, or any of this. Like, what are y'all thinking about? What should we expect to see?
It was an enormous moment, I think, for Raspberry Pi when we launched Pico. Progress in the core product line is inherently quite incremental and quite quantitative. You can tell what a future big Raspberry Pi will look like. It will look like a current Raspberry Pi, but it will be faster and have more memory. The interesting thing about Pico, of course, is that it's architecturally very different from a big Raspberry Pi. It's a microcontroller platform, not a microcomputer platform. And that it's built on silicon that was designed by the team here at Raspberry Pi in Cambridge. And those were both big developments for us, making something which is architecturally discontinuous and having it be our own silicon. And of course, building your own silicon does free you up to make your own choices, make your own architectural choices. RP2040 is, I guess it's characterized by trying to deliver large amounts of bandwidth. So we've come from an application processor world, from a computer world, where bandwidth is king. And some of that ethos has been brought to the microcontroller space. And so it's a device that has an enormous amount of internal bandwidth. It has a lot of processing power. You mentioned TinyML. It's actually a very interesting platform for running TinyML applications on, because although it has quite small cores. It has these ARM Cortex-M0 Plus cores in. They're quite highly clocked. They're implemented on a fairly modern process node by microcontroller standards, 40 nanometers, and they run at a fairly high clock speed. They run at 133 megahertz. They're very, very, very overclockable, and there are two of them. And so you can do a lot of dot products. To some extent, machine learning is inference is about doing dot products. You can do a lot of multiplies and a lot of adds, and so you can do a lot of dot products. It's kind of both a low cost and a relatively high performance microcontroller platform. It's a lot of fun to develop. In terms of where might that go next, obviously there are quantitative improvements that can be made in that space. So you're kind of back to, whenever you make something kind of new and cool, the next thing you make in that line kind of inevitably ends up being less different. Obviously, there are opportunities to add more processing power to that platform. There are opportunities to add more storage to the platform, opportunities to improve its I/O, opportunities to improve its power performance, its security performance. We are very keen members. You mentioned RISC-V. We are very enthusiastic members of the ARM ecosystem. We do in every Raspberry Pi product, big or small, that we've ever shipped has had an ARM processor in it. We are big believers in the value of that processor ecosystem. We think we get a lot of value. It doesn't cost very much to be a member of that ecosystem, and you get a lot of value out of it. So I do suspect we're going to continue to build, in the big and the little space, we're going to continue to build ARM-based platforms. But equally, we do recognize the value in RISC-V. We are a member of the RISC-V. I think we believe we're a silver member of the RISC-V Foundation. You can articulate benefits to a customizable, freely modifiable instruction set architecture like RISC-V, just as you can articulate benefits to a standardized controlled instruction set environment like ARM. And so, we are a member of RISC-V International. I wouldn't hold your breath for a RISC-V based Raspberry Pi 5. I wouldn't hold your breath for a Raspberry Pi 5, but I wouldn't hold your breath for a RISC-V based Raspberry Pi 5. I think there are substantial hurdles, certainly in the big space, in the what we call the A-class space, because we're ARM, because we're an ARM company, we call that space the A space, and we call the other space the M space. There are substantial hurdles to overcome, both in terms of the availability of high-performance cores and then the maturity of the software platform on top of it that need to be overcome before you could really countenance building a big Raspberry Pi platform on RISC-V. It might be a little bit easier to do something in the microcontroller space. But yeah, it's wonderful having that freedom to sit down with a completely blank sheet of paper and say, actually, what piece of silicon, if we want to accomplish this goal, Pico was a goal. If we want to accomplish this goal, what piece of silicon would we build? How would we fill this blank sheet of paper in?
So I will not look for any RISC-V Raspberry Pi 5s or any other 5s until 2025? At the earliest?
2025. It's interesting you sort of think about how long it takes us to... we're learning an interesting lesson, actually, when we look at sales of RP2040. We sold a little over 5 billion RP2040s last year, microcontrollers last year. On some level, that's great, right? Selling 5 million of anything is an achievement. On the other hand, we think, wow, this is a great platform. Why is and the world microcontroller market is a 28 billion unit market, and we have this amazing microcontroller that's very powerful and very cost effective. Why do we not have more of this market? And of course, what you realize is design-ins take time. It takes a long time to go from a concept to a prototype to a product that you can manufacture at scale. And that's true of our customers in the microcontroller space. And it's true of us. So it takes us a lot of time to develop a new Raspberry Pi product. So yeah, I think we are some distance away from being able to ship, say, a Raspberry Pi 5. The good thing is we went into this with Raspberry Pi 4. Raspberry Pi 4 is a discontinuously good platform relative to its predecessors. It's about 3 times the performance of a Raspberry Pi 3 Plus. And so we went into this interesting 4 years with a fresh platform which was surprisingly faster than its predecessor. So it's still got legs.
All right. Well, I will let you go back to squeezing that Raspberry Pi for better performance. And I appreciate you coming on the show this week. Thank you so much, Eben.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes this week's episode of the Internet of Things cast. Please join us Thursday and don't forget to subscribe. And if you can't get enough IoT news, I would love for you to sign up at www.stot.com for our weekly IoT newsletter, where we explain all kinds of things that we don't even get to on the show. And please subscribe.